Thank you very much for that intro. I'm always very fascinated by these intros because I listen to them thinking, surely that cannot be me. I didn't do all of that. Welcome, ladies. It's really, really a pleasure and my honor to talk to all of you this afternoon. I think, this lockdown has taught all of us how to already adapt and how to start doing things so differently. And I'm really proud of the GirlCode girls to actually grabbing this opportunity and coming up with these innovative ways of still continuing to educate and to drive this awareness of females in the ICT industry. And of course, as always, I'm always ready to actually get behind them. I think what's been so interesting for me, I've been listening to all the fascinating and amazing speakers, and they've all covered so much. And I don't want to repeat any of what they're saying because I know your time is so precious to you. And I've sort of reconfigured in the past couple of minutes some of the things that I wanted to talk about. And I think it's important for us during this time of lockdown, because I think somebody mentioned earlier on that this is going to be the new normal, or in fact, it is already the new normal for us. And I think what's been so interesting for me is that, if you want to just read up a bit more about myself, I've been writing a lot more now on Afriel, the website www.afriel.co.za. It's interesting how I've been reflecting that this lockdown has taken me so much back to my childhood, and I found myself working at a very young age of 16 years old. And I always thought that, one of the things I missed out on so much in life was just being carefree and being a housewife and staying at home and preparing these amazing meals for the family, and also having this opportunity just to spend time with kids every day and go and have long coffees and drinks with my friends. And I think what the lockdown has proven to me is actually, no, that's never going to happen. And I'm actually glad that once this period ends, I can be out there again in the trenches, trying again to contribute to this space. One of the areas that I think is quite crucial for me, and something that I have over time learned the art of adapting, and I've actually strengthened it quite remarkably, has been redefining my space all the time. I've always worked in different spaces, and I've always been labeled different titles in those spaces, but that's not really what I've always done. I think one of the things that decades of working in the industry have taught me is the importance of partnership and collaboration. And I think this is something that GirlCode actually does quite well. I love how they are so confident in terms of what they're delivering and what they bring to the party, that they're quite comfortable in terms of going out and saying, how can we work together? And I think that's a skill over time I've really honed in on, is to look at a situation and to actually figure out, how do I make a whole out of the different parts? And for anyone who knows me, I'm genuinely that person. I'm genuinely the guy who always knows a guy. And I think one of the things that have really played out well for me in the sector is actually always being consistent, and I think being authentic and really being genuine about wanting to guide and support others. And I think because of this, I'm seen by many leaders globally, I think on the continent and even internationally, as a trusted partner. And I think for anyone who's on the call right now, I think if you're wanting to start off, be it as an entrepreneur, be it as an employer, an employee, as a small business, wanting to work in corporate, I think first and foremost, one of the things that I've learned over time is that, there's nothing that is better than being consistent, being authentic, and delivering what you say you're going to deliver when you actually promise something. And I think, of course, there's no way, once you bring that part of you to the table, that you are never ever going to come to somebody's mind when they actually need something to be done. And I think many speakers throughout the day have touched on things like mentorship, sponsorship, etc., etc. And I think one of the things that works very well for me is that ability to identify certain traits in people that speak to my greater purpose in life. So regardless of seniority, again, I'm not talking about having to mix with people because they're senior. I think what you need to identify from the offset and from the onset is the characteristics of what an individual or a business or an association actually brings to the table. And I think what's worked for me and what I've tried my best to make work for others is being that voice of reason and being the person who's going to speak on behalf of others when they're not present in the room. And I think also allowing others into a space where I'm invited, because often I found in the decades again of being in the different spaces, not everyone is willing to mention your name in a boardroom or to put your name forward for certain recommendations. I always think of a verse that says that your feet will enter into places, or your name will enter into places where your feet have not yet even entered as yet. And I think it's so important, that you have these associations where somebody is quite comfortable saying, oh, you know what, I think I would like to recommend so-and-so. And I've been very fortunate over the many years. I have got so many mentors that I have access to from a business perspective, a spiritual perspective, just from pure friendship. And again, I think it speaks of these characteristics and traits that we need to be so clear around, that you need to have that genuine affinity for always wanting to pay it forward. And there's often times when opportunities are brought to me that are very lucrative opportunities. But again, I look at something and I think, yeah, this is not for me. That's not where my heart and my soul and my passion is. But I know somebody, or I know a couple of people who could benefit from this opportunity. So it's quite important to ensure that you associate with those people who are going to speak about you positively, even when you are not in the room. And again, I think it's also just as important for you to be aware of those people who are going to speak negatively about you when you're not in the room. I know of a mentee that I still mentor today, somebody very senior, who for months and months couldn't figure out why she would go for opportunities and never be considered, only for her to find out that one of the references that she actually had placed on her CV was actually the reason why she was not progressing, because this was a mentor who just felt, I don't think she's ready. And because they felt she was not ready, they were not ready to actually open those doors. So always be quite mindful, again, of who you bring into your space and who you think you actually need to actually speak on your behalf. And again, it's got nothing to do with seniority. I've also had extremely junior people and associates come up to me and say, oh, you know what, I've seen this in the following people when I went to this course. Charmaine, I really need you to reach out to them and look out for them and look after them. And again, because of the authenticity of the request that's coming to me, immediately I will look up and look out. Something else that I think is quite important, and it's for all of us, it's not, and a lot of these points, again, are not just because we're female or we're entrepreneurs or we're senior women. I think something that's worked for me consistently is always being factual, being well researched, being very articulate when I make my points, and ultimately, I think, of course, also being very kind. And I think, again, the important factors for me is always, despite what's happening inside me and what's happening around me, I always go back and I get regular feedback from very trusted sources. Because again, when you have very solid contacts and you have access to various global leaders and continental leaders, it can get you to a space where you think you can do no wrong. But again, I think the important thing is to always fact check and balance check it. Also, of course, have that ability to go back and say, you know what, I'm sorry. I did the following, or I said the following, but in hindsight, when I go and reflect and I think about this a bit more deeply, I'm really sorry. So I think regardless of what point you're coming from, one thing I've learned in life is that, and I've come across all types of people in the very many decades I've been around, is that you never know what somebody is actually going through in life. And so therefore, I think the important thing is always just to be kind. And I think, again, just accept that not everyone's going to like you, and not everyone's going to like your idea, not everyone's going to agree with you. And in fact, some may even be threatened by what you put forward and by your ideas. And you know what? I think it takes a lot of practice, and I think a lot of speakers spoke about it over time. It takes a lot of resourcefulness. It takes a lot of grit. It takes a lot of shooting your shot, as Zandi said. It takes a long journey to get to a point where you realize that actually I'm okay with this because I know who I am authentically, and I know how to separate fact from fiction. And you know what? When all is said and done, I know that what is meant for me and what is destined for me has to come back to me. So I think that is something that I live by. And of course, when I default at all times, I come back to a very solid guideline that my many mentees in the spiritual world always guide me into, is that always be kind. Because again, we just never know what anyone around us is actually going through. And I think finally, something that I have personally experienced, something that I've witnessed again over the many years, and I was actually chatting to somebody about this last night who had called me up with some guidance on something they were starting. I was explaining to this individual that something that we forget is the principle of abundance. Something that we seem to forget is that the pie is actually really big enough for all of us. I think we fail to understand that there's such a lack of innovation, there's such a lack of authenticity, there's so much that we should be doing in the sector and that we should be sharing in the sector, that genuinely I think there is enough to go around. So I don't think that we should ever get to a point where we actually feel like it's not big enough for all of us. There is enough. There's enough places for GirlCode to exist. There's enough for Africa Teen Geeks to exist. There's enough for so many of the associations and entities to exist. And I think Zandi made a very important point earlier that all that we need to figure out is how do we then work better together at collaborating and partnering to ensure that we address many of the gaps in the ecosystem. And again, I think coming from the sector for such a long time, I think we've been trained to believe that the real normal is what happens in Silicon Valley, or the real normal is what happens in the Middle East, and the real normal is what's happening now in Rwanda. But I think what we forget is that in our own country, Africa, we've got so many challenges that we need to address. So my full-time job, apart from all the other nice things that I actually do, is I look after Africa for a multinational company. And by looking after Africa, my job is to actually ensure that I grow the business in Africa. I work on new digital opportunities with African leaders, with businesses, but mostly with African leaders. And of course, in this capacity, I've been fortunate enough to meet from presidents to prime ministers to heads of the UN, AU, etc. And we sit side by side discussing Africa's challenges and Africa's opportunities and Africa's innovations. And again, I think I often hear of, oh, well, can you take us and show us what's happening in Silicon Valley? How can we copy and paste what's happening over there? Forgetting that the sector out here is in such dire needs of solutions from Africans and by Africans. And again, I think I take my hats off to associations like GirlCode, who are driving that narrative that it actually is possible here. And to so many of the previous speakers who actually put their hands up saying, reach out to me, I'm prepared to give that guidance and I'm prepared to give that advice. Because again, the pie is big enough. I've started various associations. I've led many associations in the ICT industries, and I've handed them over. I haven't sold them to anyone. I haven't given them to anyone with any conditions that I remain interested or I remain involved or I remain invested. I've literally handed them over because I've realized I'm not adding any value, or it's not bringing me any joy anymore, or I've seen other young women who are actually doing so much better things than I'm actually doing out there. And I think when we can all get to that state of understanding and realizing that it's okay to walk away from an opportunity when somebody else can do it better than you, because there are other things that are waiting for me to achieve that are destined for me. I think then we're going to start seeing just how lucrative this sector actually is and how much can actually be driven from the sector. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm actually going to start to wrap up, because what I would like to actually do, GirlCode team, is actually maybe have an opportunity to stay online a bit more, so I can actually maybe take some questions if there are any from any of the attendees.
Charmaine, I haven't seen any questions come in as yet, but once they do, I will make sure to direct them to you.
Okay.
Yeah. With that being said, thank you so much for speaking about being genuine about wanting to mentor someone, especially because you have been very consistent at mentoring us and getting us into the rooms that we needed to be in. And thank you for imparting that paying it forward knowledge to our attendees today, because I don't think it's mentioned enough, especially at events like these. So thank you for bringing that aspect, and we really appreciate you and everything that you've done for us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Someone has sent a question saying they're looking for a mentor.
So again, if anyone wants to reach out to me and look at some of the mentorship stuff that we're actually doing, they can feel free to go on to www.afriel.co.za. But I also think, Tiniko, that a lot of what you guys are already doing is already offering quite a lot of that sort of mentorship, sponsorship, coaching role. You're actually playing quite a vital role for the ICT sector already. And I think, again, this is something that you add into your already very busy agenda and portfolio. And I think this is an opportunity also for GirlCode to start channeling these. Because again, I think there are so many women like me, so many women like many of you, and so many of the other previous speakers who have put up their hands and said, please, I am willing to offer of my vast knowledge within the sector. I am willing to actually share, not the joys all the time, but actually a lot of the lows. I think, and it's important. That's why I encourage mentorship, because I think, Tiniko, what some of us often misunderstand, we often think that a lot of our journeys, like a lot of people look at me and say, but Charmaine, your journey has been remarkable. It's been beautiful. Every time we open up the newspaper, we look online, you've gone to fabulous places, you're doing fabulous things, but many people don't understand the amount of bullying that happens in the space. A lot of people don't understand that for somebody like me, who came from a very, rough rural township area, who had to reconfigure my space in my head very quickly, and it took me a long time to actually find the right people to guide me and mentor me, and to strip away at the layers of grit to actually finally get to a place of grace. I think these are a lot of the conversations that GirlCode is starting to drive, apart from just the coding. And I think this is also so important, and it's an important aspect that maybe we can talk offline about and figure out how, apart from all the other things you have in your toolbox, we can start adding maybe even like a monthly hookup, where we come online as mentors, as coaches, as sponsors, and we actually start to share, some other names of other people who I know are quite willing to actually put their hands out there and actually do mentor. Because I think, as somebody earlier on in the call had also said, something else that we have to also be careful of. I know there was a time when I was sitting with close to over 200 mentees, and it was just not feasible. Because again, I think the important thing is you want to give equal time and equal space and equal attention to everybody. So I think we'll talk offline, Tiniko, about how maybe we can actually pull together that idea of actually bringing in some very seasoned mentors and actually start to spread that knowledge across to all of those who are actually attending today and to others.